They told him he was on his own now. But no one expected that the last $5 in his pocket would lead him to something no one else had ever noticed. Before we start, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's get into the story. He had always known life could be hard, but he never thought it would turn on him so quickly. The day he turned 18, there was no celebration, no cake, no kind words. Instead, there was a small bag tossed at his feet and a cold sentence that echoed louder than anything he had ever heard. "You're old enough now. Figure it out." The door shut behind him, and just like that, he was alone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the cracked wooden door as if it might open again. It didn't. The street was quiet. Dust moving slowly with the breeze, as if even the wind had no reason to rush. He picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and started walking without knowing where he was going. At first, he tried to stay strong. He told himself it was temporary, that he would find a job, maybe a place to stay, maybe someone who would give him a chance. But as the hours passed and the sun climbed higher, his hope began to feel thin, like something stretched too far. By evening, his feet hurt, his stomach growled, and his thoughts had slowed down. He found himself near an old gas station at the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the sign flickered, and the place looked like it had been forgotten years ago. Still, there was a small corner behind it, hidden from the road. That night, he slept on the ground for the first time. The cold surprised him. It crept into his bones slowly, making it hard to rest. Every sound felt louder in the dark: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a truck, the bark of a dog somewhere far away. He wrapped his arms around himself and stared at the sky. He didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him felt too tired for tears. Morning came too soon. He woke up stiff and sore, his clothes covered in dust. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then it all came back at once. The door, the words, the silence. He stood up slowly, brushed himself off, and looked around. There wasn't much to see, just the empty road stretching ahead. But as he walked, he noticed something different. A little further down, a small crowd. It wasn't large. Just a handful of people gathered around a row of old tables and scattered items. Some trucks were parked nearby, and a man stood on a wooden crate, calling out prices in a loud voice. It was an auction. He had never been to one before, but he had heard about them. People selling things they didn't want anymore, or things left behind, hoping someone else would find value in them. He walked closer, more curious than anything else. There were tools laid out, wrenches dented, buckets, worn-out ropes. A few men in dusty hats looked through the items, picking things up, inspecting them, then putting them back down. The air smelled like old metal and dry earth. He didn't belong there. He knew that. He had nothing to buy, nothing to sell. But still, he stayed. Maybe it was because he didn't have anywhere else to go. The auctioneer moved quickly, his voice sharp and practiced. $10 due, I hear. 10. 8.5. Sold. People nodded, exchanged small amounts of cash, and carried their purchases away. Then, near the edge of the yard, he noticed something different. It wasn't on a table like the others. It sat alone on the ground, half covered by a torn, dirty tarp that flapped gently in the wind. The metal beneath it was dark with rust, the bars bent slightly in places. A cage. Not new, not useful, at least not at first glance. It looked heavy and forgotten, like something that had been dragged from the back of a barn and left there for no reason at all. No one was looking at it. No one seemed to care. He walked toward it slowly, almost without thinking. The closer he got, the more details he noticed. The hinges were stiff, the latch worn down. There were scratches along the bars, old and deep, like something had once tried to push its way out. He reached out and touched it. The metal was cold, even in the sun. "All right, last item," the auctioneer called out. "What do we have here?" "Old cage, probably scrap." "Who'll give me $5? A few people chuckled. $2? The man tried again. Silence. The boy looked down at his pocket. He hadn't checked it since the day before. Slowly, he reached in and pulled out what little he had left, some crumpled bills, a few coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He didn't know why, but something about the cage felt different. Not useful, not valuable in the way others saw value, but not empty either. "5, he said quietly. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. $5. You got it, sold. A few heads turned. Someone laughed under their breath. "What are you going to do with that?" a man asked, shaking his head. "Start a zoo." Another voice added, "Kid just wasted his last money." He didn't answer. He picked up the cage, or at least tried to. It was heavier than he expected. The metal scraped against the ground as he dragged it away from the yard, each step slow but steady. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't look back. For the first time since he had been kicked out, he felt something small but real, a decision. It wasn't much, but it was his. By the time the sun began to set again, he had found an old, broken shed not far from the gas station. The roof had holes, and the walls leaned slightly, but it was better than the open ground. He pulled the cage inside and sat down next to it, breathing heavily. His hands were dirty, his arms sore, and his stomach empty. He stared at the cage for a long time. Up close, it looked even older. The rust wasn't just on the surface, it had eaten into the metal over the years. The corners were thick with dirt, and the bottom looked uneven, as if something had been added or repaired long ago. He ran his fingers along the base. That's when he felt it. A slight gap. It was small, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. He leaned closer, brushing away some of the dirt with his hand. There, near the bottom edge, was a thin line that didn't match the rest of the metal. A panel. His heart beat a little faster. He tapped it lightly. A faint sound came from inside. He froze, his hand still resting on the metal. Then he tapped again. Something inside moved, and suddenly, that rusty cage didn't feel empty anymore. He didn't move for a long time after hearing that sound. His hand stayed on the metal, his fingers stiff, as if pulling away might make whatever was inside disappear. His breathing slowed, and he leaned closer to the cage, listening carefully. Nothing. Only silence. Again. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it. Maybe it was just the loose metal shifting, or something small like a pebble trapped inside. After all, it was an old cage, left out in the open, dragged around, forgotten for years. But then he tapped again. A faint rattle answered him. This time he was sure. Something was inside. He sat back, his thoughts racing. It didn't make sense. The cage had been sitting at the auction, uncovered, ignored by everyone. If there was something valuable inside, someone would have noticed. Right? Unless it was hidden. He leaned forward again and examined the bottom more carefully. The thin line he had noticed earlier was clearer now that he had brushed away the dirt. It wasn't just a crack, it was a sealed edge. Like a hidden compartment someone had carefully closed and then left to rust over. He swallowed. His hands were already sore from the day, but he didn't hesitate. He looked around the shed and found a broken piece of wood and a small, bent screwdriver lying in the corner. They weren't much, but they were enough to try. He pushed the tip of the screwdriver into the edge of the panel. It didn't move. He tried again, harder this time, pressing with all the strength he had left. The metal groaned slightly, but the panel stayed in place. Hours passed like that, prying, pushing, stopping to catch his breath. Starting again, his fingers slipped more than once, scraping against the rough edges. The skin on his hands began to tear, and a dull ache spread through his arms. But he didn't stop. Not this time. Something inside him had changed since the day before. Yesterday he had been drifting, unsure, reacting to everything life threw at him. Now, for the first time, he was choosing to keep going, even if it hurt, even if it led to nothing. Finally, after what felt like forever, the panel gave a sharp crack. He froze. Then, slowly, carefully, he pulled it open. A small cloud of dust rose into the air, making him cough. He waved it away and leaned closer, squinting into the dark space inside the cage's base. At first, he couldn't see much. Then, as his eyes adjusted, shapes began to form. Not an animal, not tools, not money, just a tightly wrapped bundle covered in old cloth, and something small and metallic resting on top of it. His shoulders dropped slightly. For a brief moment, disappointment washed over him. After all that effort, all that hope, it was just papers. He sat back, letting out a slow breath. Of course, it was nothing, he thought, just old junk hidden away and forgotten. But still, he had come this far. Carefully, he reached inside and pulled the bundle out. The cloth was dry and fragile, falling apart at the edges as he unfolded it. Inside were stacks of papers, yellowed with age, their corners worn and curled. On top of them sat a small metal tag. He picked it up first. It was simple, no bigger than his thumb. With a number stamped into it, faded, but still visible, the surface was scratched, like it had been handled many times before, being hidden away. He turned it over in his fingers, trying to understand what it meant. Nothing. Just a number. He set it aside and picked up the papers. The first page was covered in writing neat, careful handwriting that had faded but was still readable. Lines of numbers, short notes, dates. He frowned. It didn't look like anything important, but as he flipped through more pages, a pattern started to form. These weren't random notes. They were records. Detailed ones. Each page listed animal types, counts, conditions. There were notes about feed, travel routes, weather conditions. Some pages even had rough maps drawn in the margins, showing paths through hills and across dry land. He leaned closer, his curiosity growing. This wasn't junk. Someone had spent years writing this. And then he noticed something else. Certain marks appeared again and again, small circles drawn on the maps, always near places that looked empty, dry areas, far from towns, places most people wouldn't bother to go. Next to those circles were short notes. Strong flow beneath, good, even in summer. Hidden under rock layer, his eyes widened slightly. Water. These notes were about water. He flipped through more pages, faster now, his heart starting to beat harder. Every few pages, there it was again, a circle, a note, a quiet mention of water in places where there shouldn't be any. He had grown up hearing farmers complain about dry land, about how hard it was to find reliable water. Wells ran dry, rivers shrank, and some areas were simply abandoned because nothing would grow there. But this was different. This was a record of places where water still existed, hidden, forgotten. He stopped at one page and stared at the name signed at the bottom. It was written clearly with the same steady hand as the rest of the notes, a name he had heard before, an old rancher. People in town used to talk about him sometimes, usually older folks, sitting outside shops, telling stories. They said he knew the land better than anyone, said he could find water where others saw only dust. And then one day, he was gone. No one knew what happened. Some said he left. Others said he got lost out in the hills. Over time, people stopped talking about him altogether. The boy swallowed, looking back at the papers in his hands. These weren't just records. They were his work, his knowledge, everything he had learned, written down and hidden away. But why hide it? Why seal it inside a cage and let it be sold as scrap? Unless he never got the chance to come back for it. A quiet feeling settled in his chest. Not fear, not excitement, something heavier. Responsibility. He looked at the maps again, tracing one of the marked locations with his finger. It wasn't too far from where he was. Now maybe a day's walk. If he guessed right. His stomach growled, reminding him of his situation. He had no home, no job, no clear path forward, just a rusty cage, and a hidden map that might lead to something real. He leaned back against the wall of the shed, staring up at the broken roof as the last light of the day faded. Yesterday, he had nothing. Today, he had a choice. He could ignore it, walk away, try to survive the way everyone expected him to. Or he could follow these markings, take a risk, and see if the forgotten notes of a missing man could change anything at all. He looked down at the papers one more time, his decision forming quietly but firmly. If even one of those marks was real, everything could change. And without realizing it, he whispered to himself, almost like a promise, I'm going to find out. Because what he held in his hands wasn't just old paper anymore. It was a map to something no one else even knew still existed. He didn't leave right away. That night, he sat in the broken shed with the papers spread out in front of him, studying them again and again. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, making the pages shift slightly, as if they were alive and waiting to be followed. For the first time in days, his hunger didn't feel like the most important thing. His focus had changed. He traced the nearest marked location with his finger, trying to understand the path. The map wasn't perfect, just rough lines, small notes, and landmarks that might not even look the same anymore. But there was enough to try. He folded the papers carefully and wrapped them back in the cloth. This time, he didn't shove them into the cage. Instead, he placed them inside his bag, close to him, close where they mattered. By morning, he was ready. Not fully prepared, he didn't have much, but ready enough. He found a half-empty water bottle near the gas station, bought a small piece of bread with the last of his coins, and looked out toward the dry hills in the distance. Most people avoided those hills. They said there was nothing out there. That was exactly why he started walking toward them. The first few hours were easy. The ground was flat, the path clear enough, and the sun not too harsh yet. He kept the map in his mind, checking it every so often to make sure he was heading in the right direction. But as the day went on, things changed. The land grew rougher. The soil turned harder, cracked in places like it hadn't seen rain in years. Small rocks shifted under his feet, making each step more careful than the last. The wind picked up, dry and steady, carrying dust that clung to his clothes and skin. By afternoon, his water was almost gone. He slowed down, wiping sweat from his forehead, his throat dry. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if it was all wrong? What if the notes were outdated? Or worse, completely useless? He stopped walking and looked around. There was nothing. No trees, no buildings, no signs of life. Just open land stretching in every direction. Anyone else would have turned back, but he didn't. He took a deep breath, reached into his bag, and pulled out the papers again. His eyes moved quickly over the markings, until they landed on a small note he hadn't paid much attention to before. Ground cooler, near broken posts. He frowned slightly and looked up. Broken posts. He scanned the area again, slower this time, more carefully. And then he saw them. Not far ahead, barely noticeable against the dry land, stood a few old wooden posts, leaning at odd angles. They looked like the remains of an old fence, long abandoned and nearly forgotten. His heart beat a little faster. He walked toward them, his steps quicker now despite his exhaustion. When he reached the posts, he stopped. At first glance, the ground looked the same as everywhere else, dry, dusty, lifeless. But then he crouched down and placed his hand on the soil. ... It felt different. Kula, just like the note said. He swallowed, his hands suddenly steady. This was it. He didn't waste time. Using a piece of metal he had carried with him, he started digging. The ground was tough at first, resisting him, but he kept going. Each scoop of dirt made his arms ache more, but he didn't stop. Minutes turned into an hour. Then more. His breathing grew heavy, his movements slower, but his determination only grew stronger. He had come too far to quit now. Then, the sound changed. Instead of the hard scrape of dry soil, there was a softer, duller thud. He froze. Carefully, he cleared more dirt away. The soil beneath was darker, damp. His hands shook slightly as he dug faster now, pushing the dirt aside with urgency. And then, suddenly, a small patch of wet earth gave way beneath his fingers. Water, not a puddle, not just moisture, a steady seep. He sat back, staring at it, his chest rising and falling as he tried to take it in. It was real. All of it was real. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, and laughed quietly, the sound strange after so much silence. For the first time since he had been thrown out, he didn't feel lost. He felt certain. The next few days changed everything. He didn't leave the spot right away. Instead, he marked it, studied it, made sure it wasn't just a small, temporary find. But the water kept coming, steady and reliable, just like the notes had described. When he finally returned to town, he didn't look the same. Not because of his clothes or the dust covering him, but because of the way he walked. There was purpose now. At first, no one believed him. When he told a few farmers about the water, they laughed, just like they had at the auction. Out there, one of them said, "There's nothing but dry land." But he didn't argue. He simply said, "Come see." One man did, then another. And when they saw it with their own eyes, when they touched the damp soil, and watched the water rise slowly from beneath the ground, the laughter stopped. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. More people came. They brought tools, equipment, questions. Some asked how he found it. Others just stood in silence, trying to understand how something so valuable had been sitting unnoticed for so long. He didn't tell them everything. Not about the cage, not about the hidden panel, not about the name on the papers. Instead, he went back to the maps. Again and again, each marked spot led to something similar, hidden water, buried just beneath the surface, waiting to be found. Months passed. The dry land began to change. Small crops appeared where nothing had grown before. Farmers who had struggled for years started to see results they hadn't thought possible. The land that had been ignored, dismissed, and forgotten slowly came back to life. And in the middle of it all was him, the boy who had once slept behind a gas station. Now people came to him for answers, not because he was older, not because he was stronger, but because he had chosen to keep going when everything told him to stop. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, he sat alone near one of the first spots he had found. The air was cooler now. The ground beneath him, alive in a way it hadn't been before. He reached into his bag and pulled out the metal tag, the same one he had found in the cage. He turned it over in his fingers, thinking. That number? It hadn't meant anything to him at first. But now, after seeing all the marked locations, he understood. It wasn't random. It was a system. A way for the man who had written those notes to keep track of everything he had discovered. This wasn't just a collection of records. It was unfinished work, a life's effort hidden away, waiting for someone else to finish it. He looked out across the land, now dotted with signs of growth and movement. Then he looked back down at the tag, and in that quiet moment, he realized something that changed the way he saw everything. The cage hadn't been important because of what was inside it. It was important because of where it had been left, sold as scrap, ignored, overlooked, just like him. He closed his hand around the tag, a small smile forming for the first time in a long while, because the biggest truth wasn't the water. It wasn't the maps. It wasn't even the land changing around him. It was this. The thing everyone laughed at turned out to be the one thing no one else was willing to look closely enough to understand.